Alright, so, sorry, is this thing in focus? It better be, because I'm not doing a third take of this. So, in yesterday's video, I put out just a pretty short and informal, non-comprehensive review of Michael Baxendall's book, Painting and Experience in 15th Century Italy. And the overall thrust of that book, the thesis, it's kind of like a textbook, as well as doing some actual primary research, is to look at the social forces that determine style and formal content. And we don't have to look at this methodology strictly in terms of artworks, because the social history of art as a movement is related to cultural studies, which is a more broad discipline and pertains to more things than just the classically understood visual arts. So the general idea of that book and the movement more generally, there are many other art historians doing important work in this kind of in this field, like T.J. Clark and John Barrell, just two examples. But the idea is to, in Marxist terms, to look at the relationship between the base and the superstructure and see precisely how the base determines superstructural elements like artistic form and style. And some of the examples from that text that I gave were like, for example, the primary audience of these works in 15th century Italy would have been merchants who were all trained in a particular subset of mathematics, and consequently the artists would build these mathematical terms into their paintings so that the audience could look at the composition and the arrangement of figures and appreciate them with the mathematical sense that they all had. So the reason, the topic of today's video, I'm just going to be kind of questioning like the importance of that particular methodology of looking at social forces and how they determine cultural phenomena as like the primary or central method that Marxist critics of not just art but any cultural phenomenon should be using. So it should be pretty obvious why we would consider that method to be fundamentally Marxist. Like, Baxendall was not a Marxist. He did not use terms like base and superstructure, but they very handily lend themselves to someone with a materialist view whose position would be that like social forces, economic forces, ultimately determine things like style. So that's all well and good and everything, but my personal interest, and I think this maybe is a result of like some secret idealism that I harbor, maybe some secret like bourgeois individualism that I have deep in my heart, but my kind of sense, my optimistic hope perhaps, is that art is like in some way separate and not entirely reducible to these kinds of like material forces. And like my desire, I think it's very important to look at social forces and do that kind of research. And again, there are a lot of great historians and critics who approach their objects with that mindset. But my desire as a critic, and I'm really just going to be like in this video kind of presenting my own questioning about this. I don't have any conclusive answers, and I have yet to find like the approach that I'm looking for. I think it's probably in Adorno, but he's so difficult to read that it's kind of inconclusive for me. But my hope is that my research as like somebody who's a very amateur art critic is to find a way to look at the formal elements of art in a way isolated from social forces without denying the obvious influence of the base on the superstructure, but Althusser said that the base determines the superstructure in the final instance. But before that final instance, the superstructure can have plenty of influence on the base, and operate in ways that may seem to be independent of the base. So my feeling is that aesthetics, art, the history of style, cannot be really just ultimately reduced to like material considerations, like the like training of the audience, the common mindset of the audience is going to determine, or like the price of pigment is going to determine like the value of like use of colors in a painting. I think that there has to be some kind of other way of looking at art in strictly formal terms, and comparing across history, across different styles and whatever, like comparing aesthetic categories to each other without needing to go beyond the institution of art, the like domain of aesthetics. I'm interested in like uncovering what in style can be understood to be more or less communistic. Like, to kind of try to give like a more concrete example of this, I'm very interested in the debates in the early decades of the 20th century between people like Lukacs and Adorno and Brecht. Brecht and Adorno, they're not like there are many differences between them, but they had a kind of antagonism with Lukacs. Lukacs was behind the Iron Curtain. He was a big proponent of realism, with some qualifications of socialist realism, whereas Adorno and Brecht were both modernists. Modernists being not simply, but about like abstraction and formalism. So like there's like a kind of value judgment coming from these two different camps that for Lukacs, like modernism is like bourgeois and kind of degenerate, and like socialist realism, or realism in one sense or another, is the real way to do like communist art or whatever. And then obviously Brecht and Adorno have the different view. They are more optimistic about modernism. And ultimately, I want to be optimistic about modernism, because the fact is that we live in a postmodernist age. So it would be kind of folly to like try to deny or in some way not reckon with modernism and formal abstraction. And I just love a lot of modernist and abstract art, so I want to be able to kind of like reconcile that in a way. But ultimately my question here is like, is realism or modernism more communist? Is there a way of doing criticism that kind of uncovers what it is in the formal elements of a work and of like art history that can be said to be more or less communistic, more or less revolutionary even? And I'm as a critic, as somebody who wants to contribute to the revolution, I am interested in kind of discovering a method of doing criticism that is in itself revolutionary, that can look at the category, look formally at a work and discern what it is about the work that is reactionary or progressive. And obviously there's a lot more to be said here, particularly about like consciousness and the role of criticism within consciousness. What is so good about being a critic? I speak a lot about consciousness on this channel in this past week especially. But these guys like Baxendale, for example, and T.J. Clark were part of a kind of like later second half of the 20th century movement, particularly in England, and it's also connected to the cultural studies, the birth of that discipline, where these guys were really emphasizing, like people like Jameson and Eagleton were really all about like consciousness and criticism as a means to achieve right consciousness, and that is the way that you're going to have a revolution. I won't. That's a topic for another video. But I just wanted to like kind of present my interests as like a young art critic. I'm not that young, but I am very young in my career. Like I'm really still trying to figure out and like find some models of a way to do art criticism that, you know, doesn't like certainly accounts for social forces like the base, but which does not reduce art to that entirely. Like there's this great quote, I'll just end up on this, from the, I think it's the beginning of aesthetic theory by Adorno, where he talks about how aesthetic philosophy has always, I'm just going to paraphrase, but aesthetic philosophy has done more philosophy than art. The general idea being that, you know, aesthetic philosophers, aestheticians, philosophers of art really focus more on the philosophy and less on the art. You really need like a deep appreciation of art and an understanding of art in order to, you know, do like a real aesthetics. And I think in order to have that kind of appreciation, you can't really like write off an entire like epochal movement such as modernism. And in order to have that kind of appreciation, you really need to go deeper into the work than just looking at the social forces, which sounds very dismissive of like a lot of, you know, great researchers like Baxendall and T.J. Clark and Barrell. I think I already mentioned them, but I don't mean to be dismissive. I just am personally interested in, you know, kind of pushing the boundaries of criticism and seeing what I can find there. So I'm just looking for answers. Don't really know where to find them. Probably in Adorno, I suspect, but he's so hard to read. But if you have any insight into this, if you have any thoughts on this, please share them below, and I'll see you next time.